Now, where did I put them? Here it is. Welcome to the Toolbox, where we discuss the tools we utilize every day. Yours to use or toss. It's up to you. But I hope you enjoy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Tools for the Toolbox. I am Burles, as you know, and I have a fantastic guest for you today. And we're going to kick this off as I always do. So, who are you, and what is your military background?
Thank you, Chance. My name is Ashleigh. My military background, I joined the Canadian Naval Reserves in the year 2000 and stayed in for about 5 years. My trade was a boatswain, which was a lot of fun. Boats, ropes, and guns. So there was a lot of high points during my career. Those ones are the easy ones to remember.
So, what was your favorite? What was your favorite gun, though?
Oh, MP5.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah.
Why was the MP5 your favorite?
Oh, well, I got to do boarding party training. I never actually was assigned to a team, but the training was just amazing. So, like, one of the highlights for me is doing on the tactical, like on the range, and so the people who were, the top shots just got to blow through the rest of the ammunition one day. So I was strapped down. I had a 180 shotgun, 870. Does
870.
that sound
Yeah.
right? 870
Yeah.
Remington on my back, Sig Sauer on my hip, and like, I don't know, hundreds of bullets, like the double barrel or the double magazines. And it was
Yeah.
just like, Kate, go to town. End of the day. So that was definitely a highlight for me.
Those are fun
Um,
days. Those are fun.
that was a really great day.
We did a gun camp in Shiloh at one point in time, and it was just like a famil on everything. We had to go over all the stuff, but at the end of the whole gun camp, they had, I think it was like 3 or 4 thousand rounds of C9 ammo that they just didn't want to hand in, so they took the C9 gunners out, and they're like,
Yeah.
"Okay, boys, you're each gonna get like, I don't know, 1,200 rounds. The range is yours." And we went to town. You're doing like standing shooting, kneeling. You go down to the prone. I was doing the whatchamacallit, the Rambo with the belt over my hand,
Oh
like
yeah.
strapping the hip. We
Yeah.
were getting fixed target coordinates from our number two, and they were like, "Come left 2 degrees," and you're like shifting fire. Like it was,
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
Those days where you just get to like experiment,
Oh yeah.
try stuff,
Yeah.
see how it feels. Those are good training days. I love
Mhm.
those.
Mhm.
So,
That said, like all the weapons I got to use were awesome
yeah,
in different ways. So, but
okay.
that was a highlight. But I
So
also really
then,
like the 9 mil just because it's easy.
what's the biggest gun that you've got to play with?
The biggest one that I was qualified on was the 50 cal.
Mm-hmm.
So those are machine guns, massive,
Yeah.
like where you have, barrel gets hot and you have to switch them over and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We had, oh my God, 50 mil Bofors on our ship, but I never qualified on them. So I just was a grease monkey for them and just like literally just greased the equipment. I don't remember why I never qualified, but it looked like a pain in the ass more than anything, and they rarely got used even in training. So even the 50 cal was just like there was a lot of setup and a lot of failures because
Yeah.
those guns are World War II era. So
Earlier.
oh great, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, really old. So like if they failed, you're just like obviously it was when they worked that you got excited.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Did you ever get to use, like, you always see it? And I've always wanted to try these, the big quad barrel ones from the American Navy with that are the 50s for their like anti-aircraft.
No,
Those would be amazing.
no.
But yeah, what can you do?
Yeah,
So now,
no,
I just
unfortunately.
question though, the
Yeah.
Bofors, the 20 mil, are you shooting just like tungsten projectiles, or are you shooting like flak out of them, or is there like what's the different ordnance that you can play with there?
I have no idea.
No
I don't
idea.
even think I
Okay.
was I don't remember even if I was on a ship that successfully fired one. Like there's a lot of like honestly, there were like I
Welcome to the
think there was a
Canadian
lot of
Navy.
yeah, there's a
Oh
lot of
man.
setup and there's a lot of exercise and the ship was gonna do it, it was gonna happen, and then everybody's all set and it's like, Kate, back we go. And you're like,
Yeah.
just happened. Yeah. So I honestly don't even remember. I remember having to like ammo the ship what
Yes.
feels like hundreds of times. So carrying the ammo around a lot. And I just remember it
Yeah.
was heavy as fuck. But
Yeah.
sorry. Um,
Yeah. Give her.
yeah. Yeah.
The
Okay, good. I'll do
yeah.
that a lot.
I was just gonna say, as any machine gunner knows, is that your best days are when you get to get rid of the ammo that you've been carrying
Yeah.
all day, right?
Yeah.
So anytime that you get a chance to just dump ammo,
Hmm.
we'll take it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
We had,
there's lots
yeah.
of times where you just carry it around all day for fun, and then you're like, oh, this is awesome,
Yeah.
as you take your shit off.
The full day. The
Yeah.
full day.
So let's get back to the history. So you were in for five,
5 years.
5 years, okay?
5-ish
And
or 4 years. Yeah. Gets
so
blurry.
what happened then?
I was mostly class B and C the entire time. So, fulfilling a Reg Force billet. But then a bunch of shit happened and I just decided I needed a break. So I took a year leave of absence. So yeah, I should say I was only ever on the in Canadian. I was only in Canada. Like I never
Yeah,
deployed past Alaska or Bellingham, Washington. I never got to go to the fun places. They started to go the year I left, which was
of
felt
course.
really good.
Yeah,
Of
yeah,
course. So anyways, no bitterness there. So I did a lot of training out east, but I was mostly on the West Coast.
hmm
So I took a year off because I needed to, rethink my life decisions. And I went to college in the interior of BC. So for me, it was a really abrupt shift from full time, deployed uniform, for years to living with hippies in the mountain who didn't understand how to tell time, apparently,
yeah, yeah,
which was a major frustration for me. So, if you're not 10 minutes early or 10 minutes late, and people used to just drive me absolutely insane. But like as it goes, there were days that I just wouldn't go to class.
yeah,
I absolutely refused to because as I know now and as we understand now, as I was having a really hard transition, really hard time connecting with people and living where I was, where there wasn't a great deal of knowledge or respect for the military.
yeah.
There was, butting of heads and different ideas and that kind of thing. So I had no supports. Shock, right? Shock of shockers. So it was a real shock to my system. I spent a year doing adventure training, which I absolutely loved.
hmm
But by the time it came for my 1 year up, I put on my uniform for the last time, went in, handed in my paperwork, signed on the line, wouldn't even consider doing sup-res or anything.
Yep.
I was so angry. I'd spent a year without supports, just kind of like overloading the anger without actually directing it anywhere. And so I just left.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
So,
Not on great terms.
well, there's a reason that there's the old stereotype of the bitter corporal, the salty corporal, right? You're in for 3 4 years, you start realizing that all of the regimental bull, all the politics and all the games that you have to play and the hoops that you have to jump through in order to get really anywhere, uh, it just tires people out. And
Yeah.
I think you and I were talking about it on the canoe trip. Was like the military now is in this huge leadership vacuum because after Afghanistan, we were all just like, nope, not doing this anymore. Peace.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it makes a lot of sense. And man, I can't even imagine school entrance into school directly after the military is that's a whole new ball of wax, right?
I would call my entrance into school kind of like a soft entrance because I went from, like I say, the full-time military thing, and as a lot of us know in the military, there's a certain rush that comes with a lot of our work. So I had
hmm
replaced that rush by doing an education where I learned, backcountry skiing and ice climbing and whitewater kayaking. So I was getting that adrenaline rush. It was a really soft shift. I mean, my school was pretty relaxed.
hmm
We had the 30 centimeter rule. So if it snowed 30 centimeters, you're expected at the ski hill, not in the classroom. So, it was a really it was a little bit it was easy, like it wasn't
Yeah.
that part of it wasn't a big challenge. But any like I did decide to kind of commit to school on a part-time level after that. So I picked
Okay.
away at an undergraduate degree for almost 10 years, which I did like 70% of it online, which gave me lots of freedom to
Awesome.
travel, which involved just being a ski bum in the mountains in BC, up in the Yukon, kind of bounced back and forth. And it sounds like fun. And in hindsight, there was definitely fun aspects of it. But what was really happening was I had no sense of direction. I had no sense of purpose. I had no drive. I was just absolutely lost for years. The only thing that kept me grounded was school.
Yeah.
So, and I would ski all winter and then I would go to school full time so that I didn't have to get more than a part-time job. And in the summers, so worked, bartending or that kind of thing, and then head back to the mountains for the winter. So it was a soft a soft turn into school, but
Yeah.
eventually I finished my undergrad. And then I found myself again totally just lost. I didn't have a specific job that I was going for. I didn't have any purpose again. So then I decided to do a master's degree. And I focused on my undergrad, I focused on military and mental health, and I focused on that again for my master's degree.
Hmm.
And then after that, I ended up getting a job in a hospital in psychiatric care, which honestly just wasn't for me in that setting. So I started thinking about doing more education. But what the turning point I think for me was how can I best serve my community? And I knew at that point that I needed to do something with the military again. It had kind of hit me throughout my master's degree. How can I best serve? How can I help my friends that are still there? So I went on and now I'm doing a PhD and I'm in my third year of a neuroscience degree focusing on PTSD for military and first responders.
Damn. That's that is way more school than I am willing to put up with personally.
I had no idea. Like, I got to be clear. I was kicked out of high school many times. I dropped out of high school many times. School and that kind of structure was never for me.
Yeah.
So,
Well, good
yeah.
on you, man. Like that is the fact. I know a lot of people that will either, they get out of the military and they're so used to the work, the constant work, right? And there,
Mhm.
even if you're not doing anything, you can find something to do, right? Like at one point, I got really bored because my warrant officer uh, took all of our chairs and desks out of the troop bay, so we had no place to sit down. And I was like, well, I guess I'll just go do something. So I went to the scrap wood bin and I pulled a bunch of wood out and I built benches that we then
Nice.
put in the thing.
Yeah.
I didn't tell the warrant what I was building until after we had built it and painted it with all our logos and stuff, and then threw it in the bay and was like, "What are you doing?" But I know guys that got out and immediately went to work. They were like, no
Yeah.
transition whatsoever, and they just buried themselves in work. And then 5, 6, 10 years later, they're now going, like it just the weight of it is all crushing them down.
Hmm. Hmm.
But taking the time to really figure out, like, what do I actually want to do?
Yeah.
Where is my skills going to be useful? Where is this going to be?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that's a hard choice because the other part of it is everything's trial and error, and we're
Oh, yeah.
so used to the military of just like this is what you're supposed to do, so you go do it, and then you finish the
Hmm.
job, and then they tell you
Hmm.
what to do next, and then but when you're outside of that and you're like, well, I mean, I'm going to try school, and school might not work, right? You might not
Yeah.
get what you want out of that. You might go to work, and you might not get what you want out of that either. So,
Oh,
it,
exactly. I think I've
being willing
spent
to,
years doing that,
yeah,
like I finish off one degree and get a job and realize, well, this isn't the field for me, or I really just don't like 9 to 5. Um, Maybe that's why I'm still in school, is because I don't really want to get a real job. I'm gonna be pretty screwed in a
smart,
couple years.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, like I've definitely spent many, many years just wandering around and trying out different things, and this avenue didn't work, and this avenue didn't work, and this avenue didn't work. And I'm lucky in the sense that I've had family support, and I could come home for Christmas and just kind of like recenter and figure out, and always having parents saying, well, that's fine, just as long as you're getting a paycheck, that kind of support. So I've had, like I say, a variety of jobs, a variety of attempts at a career.
The thing though is like that's not a bad thing, right? Like if you have the support, you have the ability to just
Mhm.
try, take it, right? And I
Yeah.
mean, I talked to Whitney about this in the last podcast. It was like there are thousands of different opportunities for people to either get better, go to school, find work, like whatever, that are
Mhm.
available, and most don't want to try for it. They don't want to like go
Mhm.
for it and actually, because we look at not wanting to do something as a failure, and it's a whole nother ball of wax on that
Right.
one. But so
Right.
we've talked about. You said your transition, jumping into a place of zero support, being a bad
Mhm.
thing for to transition
Yeah.
out of the military.
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
think you would tell yourself back then? How would you? What little tidbit of information would you give yourself to make your transition just like a little bit easier?
I would say set up supports before you leave, even if you don't think that you're going to need them. Just even investigate into what's available, even if you don't make
Mm-hmm.
that phone call or send that email. Whatever it is, just know what's there should you need it, because you might not need it in the first 6 days, 6 weeks, or 6 months, but it could be 6 years, or in my case, 16 or more years, 20 years after joining, that you're like, oh shit, this would have been good to know.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, there's so much available. It's not even necessarily one contact. And if you don't like the answer that you get the first time, ask again. Try a
Yeah.
different avenue. And
Yeah.
it can be exhausting, but hopefully it'll have payoff in the end.
Well, I mean, it'll be worth it, right? Like if you
Yeah.
find the right doctor or the right program or the right school or the right job,
Mhm.
it'll be worth all of the previous attempts. Because I mean, like I went to my first therapist I went to see was at the OSI clinic here in Edmonton, and I said it many times. It was not good for me. Like we did exposure therapy, like direct exposure therapy, and
Yeah.
after about 6 months, I realized that my doctor didn't remember my son's name, and I talked about him every week, right?
Wow. Yeah,
So
that's unfortunate.
I realized that well, at least I think that he was more concerned about his next book or paper than he was
Yeah.
actually working with me, and I didn't know that I could go anywhere else. The army had
Mhm.
sent me here, so I just was like, sure, okay, that's
Yeah.
where I go, I guess. And
Yeah.
yeah, until I found a buddy of mine actually told me, he's like, you can just not go there. I was like, well, but I was told to go see this doctor, and he's like, no, you can just pick whatever doctor you want. Like, as long as they're covered with Blue
Yeah.
Cross, you're good to go. And
Yeah.
so immediately I was like, oh, I started looking up trauma doctors or trauma specialists, and then I saw one that did equine therapy, and I was like, yeah. And I made huge strides, like
Oh, that's
huge
amazing.
strides, just from
Yeah.
working with horses. So moving yourself into like the proper, um, the one that's going to work for you.
Mhm.
If it takes 10 tries, like
Definitely. Yeah.
cool, take it.
I had the similar experience. The one that I ended up with from Veterans Affairs the first time, I thought, is this what it is? Is this it? I'm like, well, this is not helpful. I think I went in like 3 times, and I was like, I don't know what I'm guess supposed to be getting out of this. I'm like,
Yeah,
the message that I'm getting is everything is fine and my life is neat. And I was like, okay, well,
okay.
I guess see you later then. Like, I didn't know what I was like, this there was just no connection for me.
Yeah,
So then just various other things happened in my life for a few years. It's like, okay, maybe we try this again. And I actually didn't even go the military route. I went a civilian route, and that
yeah,
ended up I did some military stuff, but then ended up with a civilian therapist who's been fantastic. So,
yeah,
and that's supported, which is awesome.
yeah. I think the thing we struggle with a lot of the times is that we're so used to being told where to go, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, even with school, I had absolutely no problem when I was told show up at this point in time, or like show up at 6:50 at the barn. We're gonna work the horses. We're gonna do this. Blah 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 blah. I would show up at 6:45, or I'd show up at 6:40, and I
Mhm.
would sit there and I'd watch the other students wander in at like 7 or like 7:15, wander in the middle of a lecture for some reason, and just be like on the phone, not even recognizing this, and I would want to tear my eyeballs out.
Yeah.
And like at this point too, I was also I was still Master Corporal Burles. Like I had just come from Meaford as an
Yeah.
instructor. I was like the knife hand was sharp. It was ready. There
Yeah.
was lots of things that I wanted to snap at,
Yeah.
and I was surrounded by 19-year-old girls. So it was.
Yeah.
Although the funny thing was, I said at the time was like my 18-year-old self thinking about when I'm 30 is very disappointed in myself that I am upset as a 30-year-old being surrounded by 19-year-old girls.
You just never know where you're gonna end up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, I think what it comes down to is that we're so used to putting ourselves last, right? Like it every time throughout every orders I've ever been given is mission men self, right? It's so you are the last thing to worry about. So do what you're told, get the job done, check on your troops, then work on yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I think we had said this uh, in the last attempt that stigma, which is what we want to talk about today. I personally really think that that's where that starts, because
Hmm.
you're constantly told when you first show up to a unit that it's all about the mission, and then when I got to the unit, I was watching guys come back from tour and they're not doing well, or they wanted to release or whatever, and the thing that I would get told is they're weak, they're leaving, they're quitting on us, they're taking out, like it was always uh, it was like a personal affront, right? How
Yeah.
dare that
Yeah.
person leave? Um,
Yeah.
because they were putting themselves ahead of the mission. And I mean, what are your thoughts on where that comes from? Where do you think that stigma starts?
Well, I think it has to do with fear, for one, because if it can happen to that person, then it can happen to you. And so, if you make that person other, if you identify whatever's going on with them as a weakness, and that's a characteristic that the grand you don't possess,
Yeah.
then you can distance yourself. And it's a default mode of protection, of self protection, to have that kind of stigma. But I think that, like what we were talking about before, was that it's like an acquired perspective as well.
Mm-hmm.
You don't go into the military having these prejudgments generally. It comes from, and I was thinking about it today, it's top down. This is a leadership thing. This is behavior that is modeled towards us. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you and I were both also leaders in the military, like we also had whatever rank. So it's like every single rank is responsible for that. So I think that we're learning about it now. But it's still the actual shift of
Mm-hmm.
change is still coming. Like the
Yeah.
actual change. No, we're
Yeah.
still all talking, and talking is great, but we've been talking for a really, really long time. But the actual change, we're paying a
Yeah.
lot of lip service to stigma without actually living it and promoting it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're right in that regards. The challenge that I see is that the military being such a stringent organization, any change within the military is going to take
Oh yeah.
decades, right? I mean, you think about. I had this discussion with a few guys. Was that the war in Afghanistan for Canada wasn't long enough because it didn't enable the combat experienced troops that know what leadership, like true leadership, is. It didn't allow for those guys to push high enough into the ranks to make change. They
Mhm.
got high enough into the ranks and then and then they got home, and then the war's over and they're like, well, I'm not
Right.
going to deal with this BS. This is not happening, and then we leave.
Right.
And so there, like I said earlier, there's this leadership vacuum that just all the people that there are still some, I can't say all, because there are some that stayed in, and there are still some really great leaders out there. But
Mhm.
by and large, this is why we're having such a leadership issue within the CF at that higher echelon,
Yeah.
is that the change wasn't, the cultural shift wasn't long enough to do anything. So like when we were in Afghanistan, if I needed something, I got it, right? I need a soft bag for my C9. No problem. Here you go. I need new pants because these ones are faded. No problem. I need whatever it was, right? I got it. And I get back home and I'm like, hey, I have these pants and they're see-through and I have giant holes in all the pockets. Can I get a new pair of pants? And they're like, no. Why not? Well, you're not entitled to them. And we're like, I'm trying to exchange them. No, that's not how this works. And you're like it
Oh my God.
the cultural shift wasn't there long enough to actually get rid of those people.
Yeah,
And
yeah. And the good ones, like the ones in my experience, and it's been many, many years, but the good ones that were trying to affect change, and who are trying to make a difference and we're trying to make these types of shifts, they're gone mostly, because they've burned out. They've been, they've gone to find civilian jobs. They've remustered. They've gone somewhere else because they're just being met with such resistance, that after a while you just have to give up. And I've got a couple of friends that are still pushing really, really hard and doing well, but it's a huge challenge. Sorry,
yeah,
I'm just gonna delete
no worries.
phone call. Okay.
Yeah, what I was
Anyway,
gonna say was like this. I think it really starts. We were talking about this last time. I can't remember the name that you guys got called. The reserve got
Shad.
what was shads? There we
Shad.
go. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so like
Yeah. It's a
we used to,
derogatory term.
right? It just, and
Yeah.
it's an immediate distinction, right? You
Yeah.
are either
Oh
reg
yeah.
force and you're hardcore, or for us you're part of the militia.
No.
Yeah, the
Oh,
Mo.
yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
but I know some really great troops that are reserve. I know some
Hmm.
really horrible dudes that are reg force, and like one of the
Yeah.
things we were getting into it last time was like, uh, on my training when we were doing survivability, you have to do push-ups in order to leave. So we were all out front in the push-up position with our rucks on, and I had a flag and a C9 and everything. Like, it was just crazy. And I'm sitting in the push-up position, and I watched the reserve troop come out and then start doing their push-ups. And the corporal in charge of them, I think,
Hmm.
I don't know, they got down and they did like 20. I could hear the strain in his voice as he was calling out like 22,
Right.
23, and we're still waiting, right, in the push-up position, just
Yeah.
watching this
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
And our instructor is doing the exact same thing. He's just standing there like this, waiting for them to finish. They get through their
Hmm.
25, they get up, then they put their rucks on, and then they try to march in front of us. And my instructor was like, "No, you can fucking wait."
Yeah.
And then made us do push-ups, and then we did an extra 5 or 6. Like, it was just as like a fuck you to the other
Yeah.
instructor and the other team, saying that we're better than you.
Yeah.
And it's like in
Well,
in
that's
that.
kind of the message gets hammered home right away. Like I did basic in Borden and it was the exact same thing. We were treated differently. And then the group that I was in, we were all like kids, like 17 and 18 years old. So we were really getting shit on by the rest of whoever was training there. And we were Navy, so like
Yeah.
we
On an
really
army
got
base. Oh boy.
on an army base. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, people didn't treat us with a lot of kindness. Our range instructors were PPCLI, so I mean they like to they were pretty rough on them. I liked them, but they could be a little bit rough.
Yeah.
But you got it hammered home from the day that you joined. Like I'm in a reserve unit. I spend 6 months doing, or 4 months, whatever it was, training once a week and being told to do my PT on my own. Here's the requirements. Just make sure that you hit those.
Yeah.
I couldn't do a pull up. Are you kidding me? Um, Still working on it. But like there was no real, nobody tested me before I went.
Yeah.
Nobody told me what I was getting into. I didn't understand the difference between reg force and reserve. I didn't know that there was a different mentality. I
Yeah.
didn't know what it meant at the end of the day. I mean, for me, when I joined, it was kind of like, it was literally somebody telling me that I would never even last basic. And I was like, screw you.
Yeah.
I'm going to try. So I joined the military. Um, But like this is the message that never went away, that never went, like I learned it the first time I was there, and it has stuck with me to this day, that I will remain a shad. I will remain less committed to my service than the reg force. There is a hierarchy that I have of respect that I have to adhere to. Oh yeah, I mean, this is just stuff that's absolutely ingrained. I've spent 8 years studying stigma. That is
Yeah.
what I do. I have published a paper about stigma, and yet it's still this lesson that's ingrained in me. There was a guy, I went, I hope he never sees this. I joined Ski Patrol a couple of years ago, and I was doing some first aid training, and one of the guys that joined, nice guy, had just left the military, and he was, just finding something else to do with his life. And we were kind of going around and introducing ourselves and our background and stuff, because there was a lot of military there. And I, said what I said. He goes, "Oh, so you're shad?" And I just, like, my neck I just about, like, gave myself whiplash. Like, I've just started my PhD. I'm like, "Excuse me." So and he just kind of, like, I was like, "That is a 4-letter word, man." And I'm like, "You cannot say that." And I'm like, "We get to say," like, it was just like, "No." And he's like, I didn't know." I'm like, so I just had to kind of explain very briefly, like, that's not something that a reg force dude should be saying to a reservist. It's just not. Again, this is my perspective. This is stuff that I learned 21 years ago. Maybe things have shifted, but
Not really.
yeah.
What I mean, I got out in 13, right? So like there was still at that point, like you would look down your nose at the reservists, right?
For sure.
Now, I was as an instructor, like I was teaching reserve courses as well, and I didn't care that you were reserve. If you were in my training cell, guess what? You're like, no, I'm not being nice to people. I'm not taking it easy on people. And in fact, just because you're reserve, I'm going to go harder on you. And
Oh, I'm familiar
I
with
did,
that one too.
well, I did it on purpose. And the reason is because I know that the next mentality on that next training phase, when they go to their phase 3, or if they go to their trades course or whatever, I want them to look back at my training and go, man, like that set me up for
Yeah.
this course, because
Yeah.
this is nothing compared to what I went through here.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted. I didn't want them to have this mentality of, oh, I'm a reserve. Okay, these training courses are going to be light or easy
Yeah.
or a bit of a cakewalk. And I kept thinking back to those instructors that allowed the slackness to
Hmm.
make that distinction when I was training, because I immediately looked down on people just for the fact that they were reserve, because that one instructor didn't want to put the effort into put us at
Yeah.
the same level, right? And
Yeah.
I've been a proponent of this for years, is that you have one training standard,
Yeah.
period. Reserve or reg force, man or woman, doesn't matter. This is the level. If you can meet it, cool. If not, get the fuck out. It's that
Yeah.
easy. And I know
Yeah.
lots of reg force guys that were super tough dudes. They shouldn't have been there because they couldn't maintain a certain standard in a certain area.
Hmm.
Sometimes you're a PT god, but you don't know how to study or remember things
Yeah.
or polish your boots properly or whatever, right?
Yeah.
There's a standard, and there's a standard for a reason. And the trick is, at least uh, the challenge that I had as an instructor was understanding when to pull back from that line, right? There's a hard line. Here's the standard you will either achieve or you won't.
Hmm.
But if you maintain that line,
Yeah.
uh, then you're gonna be getting rid of some people that could be trained up, that could be
Right.
you know mentored forward a little bit and gotten there. So yeah, it's a very hard. There's a gray
Yeah.
patch there. As much as I want to say, maintain the standard, uh, there is a gray area. And
Yeah.
I find that there's so many things within the military that is so binary, right? You're good to go or you're not.
Hmm.
Period. You're
Oh
reg
yeah.
force or you're reserve. Like
Yeah.
there's no There's no distinction. You're either hurt or you're injured, right? Like you either are fucked up and can't do the job, or you're a bitch.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think
There's
that
no middle between.
really plays into the stigma portion of it too, because how are you supposed to, like, how do you juggle that line?
Yeah. Well, for me, even using the term veteran didn't become part of my vocabulary until, well, I want to say 2016, 2017. So this is 12 years after I've left the military. And it was because that term veteran to me, now again, I wasn't engaged in the military community other than studying it at arm's length because I was outside the military. I had no business addressing, saying we, saying us. I was gone. I had no
Right.
contact with the military for years. So I never used the term veteran because it wasn't for me. It was for my grandfather and for combat soldiers. That was it. Um, like my whole time in the military, like in the military, the Navy wasn't really engaged in war in the same way. So still,
Yep.
it just didn't apply to me. And it wasn't until I went on an outward bound trip. And one of the guys, it was our very first day, we're all strangers to each other. And one of the guys sitting behind me in the van, we were talking just about like who are we, where we're from, and that kind of thing. And he stopped me. He's like, I just need to interrupt you. Why are you saying that you were in the military? I was like, yeah. I was like, well, then you're a veteran. Like, stop saying used to be. It's like you're a
Mm-hmm.
veteran. I'm like, well, and he's like, and, and it was, it was awesome. I really greatly appreciated. He gave me a hard time. He's like, no, did you know that you can apply for this service, and you can get this deal, and you can go do this? Write down, get a pen and paper out. And I was like, kind of going, okay, all right. That's so, it was like, I had to take that with me for the next 7 days and I was there with all retired full-time military that had been in there for 5 to
Mm-hmm.
25 years. It was all men. I was the only woman there. It was a really hard adjustment for me. And that's, I think, where my own insight into my personal stigma had begun, and realizing that I had it and I was using it against myself. And it's like,
Yep.
okay, I need to start to explore this and acknowledge what the difference is. And at the end of that trip, one of the guys said to me, "My hope for you in your future is that you can find a way to honor your military experience." And
Mm-hmm.
that to me was just like a punch to the chest in the best possible way. But I was like,
Yep.
wow. Wow, I could honor my service. What does that mean? And it was just such a thought-provoking and an insightful piece of information that I've kept with me, and for the last 5 or 6 years, and it's been a driving force to me. How
Mm-hmm.
can I honor my service? How can I honor the experience that I have and be true to myself? And part of that is addressing stigma and trying to figure out how can I help other people understand stigma if I haven't figured it out yet myself. So I'm working on it. I have no other than
Well,
I'm working on it.
that's the whole point of this podcast anyway. Is like every one of us is going to address it in a different manner, right? I say the best tool anyone can have is insight. If you can actually just stop and look at how you're making your own decisions and what the driving factor are behind those decisions, you will make huge leaps in whatever it is. If it's health, if it's fitness, if it's psychological issues, if it's eating, if it doesn't matter what it is, right? If you can actually figure out why you're making the decisions you're making,
Yeah.
then just
Yeah.
you can fly, right? All of a sudden, then you can start pinpointing it and say, oh, okay, I'm feeling shitty right now, so I want a chocolate bar. Okay, well, how do
Yeah.
I mitigate that and then go from there, right?
Yeah.
And one of the one of the things that I always got told was, so we did a lot of flutter kicks in training for, I don't know if you ever did flutter kicks.
I don't
Um,
know. The why? I don't know.
so, or the fifth point of flight procedure, just as like when we were, you fuck up on drill or you get a your failure inspection or whatever you need some remedial PT for, how
Oh,
training,
okay.
instructors do that. So one of the ones we always used to do was flutter kicks or fifth point of flight procedure, which is basically you put your hands under your butt, you put your legs 6 inches off the ground, and you start doing this, right?
Yeah.
And then it'd make you
So
hold it 6 inches off the ground, and then you do
yeah.
this, and then you do that, like, and it is such a core workout. Everyone starts to groan and like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And every time I would hear from the instructors is fucking suffer in silence, fight through the pain. You can do it. Like, and there was never. It was just shut up. It was
Yeah.
never manage it. It was never what is it that hurts. What like. It was never taught to us to think about it. It was just repress it, shut it down, don't talk
Yeah.
about it, don't think about it. And so when you're
Yeah.
thinking about physical pain and you're like, oh, I can just shut this, like push it down and I can keep working. That is a useful technique because when you have work to do and like my shoulder hurts, but I still have to lift bridge panels,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter. Lift bridge
Yeah.
panels, right? The work still needs to get done. But I think it bleeds into their mental health. It bleeds into maintain, as you said, like the stigma that was applied was then taught to you, and then you do it to yourself. And I do the
Oh,
same
yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah.
If I'm having a bad day, my back hurts, and I'm like, I probably should just sit on the couch and ice it, or just like relax for the day. The whole time, the whole day, my head is going, "Oh, you lazy motherfucker! Like, get off the
Oh,
fucking couch, right?"
I hear you. From basic training, because we had like I say, we had the PPCLI guys with us, and like
Mm-hmm.
we felt as a unit. I maybe I shouldn't speak for everybody that we had to work harder. I wasn't that hard of a worker, but we had to prove our merit while we were
Yep.
there. Like we had to push. Um, so with the motto that we had that we actually got printed on our shirts at the end of it was pain is your body's way of saying you're not dead yet. And I wasn't in the best shape back then, but it's something that stuck with me. And now it's even to my own detriment. Like when I'm at the gym or going for a run or something, and something will start to hurt, I'm like, not dead, and I keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to kind of start to adjust that. It's like, wait a second, your body might actually not be able to bounce down back from that. You might need to take it down a
Yep.
notch, but it's still there. And I find it sometimes it's an effective thing to remind me of that.
Mm-hmm.
I find it a better psychological tool actually than I do a physical tool.
Yep.
Because psychologically, whatever issue that I'm dealing with, whatever angst I'm dealing with, whatever the problem of the day is, saying it hasn't killed you.
Yep.
Like you're still here. You're still, but maybe taking it away from the physical side and applying it more to the mental side is the
Yep.
right thing to do for me.
Yeah. It's a really tricky thing too because like we're both saying is that it's a useful tool, right? To be able to tell yourself and your body, not right now. We got shit to do, right? Or the pain is just a reminder that you can make it through and that you're still okay. Um,
Hmm.
and like usually in first aid, if you all of a sudden can't feel pain, that's a bad thing. So
Yeah.
pain is a good reminder, right?
Yeah.
And
Pain is information at the end of the day, whether it's physical or psychological or emotional pain. Pain is information. It goes back to what you're
exactly.
saying about insight. So if you have the insight and the curiosity to wonder about what that pain is or wonder what that situation is, then you can start to grow from it. Like if you're at the
Hmm.
gym and you're starting to get a hip problem, or whatever, or foot problem, whatever, it's like maybe you
Hmm.
should just ask where that is coming from. Because if you don't and it goes away the next day and you're like, fuck it, I'll just throw on more weights this time, you're screwed. You're not learning what the problem was, and you can go back and you can fix it and then do a little bit better next time
Hmm.
without injuring yourself. But it's
Well,
information.
you're absolutely right, and I mean it applies to what we were saying earlier about the military not learning, not advanced. Like we're paying lip service to it, but we're not actually doing anything, right? So,
Mhm.
if the army is some dude trying to do a deadlift and he does a deadlift and his back hurts, but hey, the deadlift went up, you know,
Right.
then
Yeah.
that's technically a win, but like, is it?
At what cost?
Because
Yeah.
you're doing
Yeah.
damage every time, right? And
Yeah.
I laughed when Op Honor started to catch all the higher ups, all the generals and stuff for all of the issues that's going on there, and
Yeah.
I was like, that's exactly it right there. You're paying lip service, thinking that it's just going to be like, yes, I have this whole program that's supposed to, weed out sexual assault, and then all of a sudden people start getting pinged for sexual assault, and they're like, how did that happen? Like,
Yeah. Wait,
you know,
what?
like
Yeah.
there's no insight there. They're not actually looking at the problem. They're just trying to get people to shut up because they're look at me. I'm doing something. I'm doing something. Just shut up about it. Don't talk about it anymore, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I deal with when I help other vets, and I talk to other vets about it, is there's this concept that we owe the military something, right? And it's drilled into us constantly, right? As you go through your training, as you go through all your stuff, is that like the military is giving you all of these tools, and they're giving you all of these things, and that it is up to you to then give back to the unit or give back to the military or whatever. And I mean, like I said, when I first got to my regiment and people were leaving, they were thought of as lesser or weak or whatever, because they were giving up on the regiment, they were giving up on the rest of us there. And this debt that we think we owe to this organization, it negatively affects us when we leave, because the organization still moves, right? The army or the military is a machine, and it will continue to move forward. And as soon as you step off the train, the army, the military train, it's gone.
Yeah.
And you're not getting back on that. And even if you get back in, you're still going to be behind the curve. And I mean, I've talked to guys over the years so many times about this, is that you don't actually owe the military anything, right? Like, you did the job. They trained you to do the job. You then did it for X amount of time, whether you did it for 6 months, 8 years, 10 years, 15 years, 25 years.
Yeah.
Once your service date is over, you don't owe the military anything. And in fact, they still owe you. Which is why we have all these programs and why we have all these things. But I think it really plays into the self-stigmatization as well, because we feel this like debt. It goes back to the whole mission man self thing, right? Like,
absolutely.
How do we get people to see that once you leave the military, the mission is now self?
Yeah.
So you're not last, you're first.
That's a good way to say things. And I remember, like, when you're talking earlier, about when I was going to college and stuff, I realized, the military never really taught me, there's no transition opportunity for me. There's no programming. At the end of the day, when I left the military, I didn't know how to look after self. I didn't know how to do for myself. I mean, I could pay my bills and do my laundry and I could do those kind of things, but I really didn't know what myself was. My identity wasn't me. It was, it had belonged to a unit, to a ship. I mean, the first thing that in the military, someone asks you, where are you from? What unit do you belong to? Where have you been? What have you done? And it's all based on military. So my identity was gone from that. I mean, it was only 5 years of my life, but though it was clearly an impactful 5 years, but I didn't know how to shift that identity into figuring out who I was or what my purpose was, or that I could come first, or that I needed to take care of things like my own mental and spiritual health and that kind of stuff. It simply didn't exist. And I'm so glad to see all of these programs that have come up over the last few years. I finally shifted from being glad to being angry. I didn't know that they would apply to me or could apply to me, so I was simply angry and jealous that other people were getting something out of it and they were doing well, and I couldn't reconcile my own experience with it. So now that I see these programs are coming up, they're actually doing a lot of good in most cases, in many cases. So to go back to like advice that I would give myself, finding those supports, even if it's not a therapist, even if it's not, you don't need counseling, but finding some kind of group or activity or network that you can create that's going to act as a safety net or just a connection to that old life, if that's what you want, can be really, really important.
Yeah, the biggest piece of advice I give people when they first get out is get involved in something. Just whatever it is, like, and I think that's helped a lot in the this, I call it the veteran renaissance that's been happening over this last 10-15 years now, where you have veteran businesses opening up, you have veteran organizations opening up, you have people still working to help each other through different avenues, right, with the different programs and the different all the stuff that's happening, and it's fantastic to see.
Yeah.
The beauty of it all, I think it stems from the idea of service, right? We all want to give of ourselves. It's huge that a lot of people, I guess, I just listened to a podcast a little while ago, and he was talking about the concept of national pride, and that the old uh, the old propaganda posters in the United States of like, we want you, right, to, or ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That
Mhm.
mentality of like
Mhm.
just service to nation, it wouldn't work now, right? The average
Yeah.
person doesn't respond to that type of call out. Some still do. I was one of those kids, right? Like I grew up wanting to be in the military. I looked at it as my duty to serve, right?
Hmm.
It was 100% my obligation as a Canadian uh, child at the time, 18 to
Mhm.
19 years old, uh, that I should serve the country. And it was a great honor to do so.
Mhm.
And I still do. Like, I'm not saying that that's untrue in any way.
Yeah.
But that mentality just isn't there anymore. And then I think it gets laid into you during your training. You go to basic and you get taught all this stuff, and they're constantly harping on how much your duty means and how it is an honorable thing to do, and you're very courageous for joining up and being part of this crew and blah blah blah. But those things lead into something very negative over time. And once you leave the military, once you're outside of that circle, it can lead a lot to like guilt and shame and depression
Definitely.
because you're not part of that group anymore. You're not actually in that circle. And that's what I mean
Absolutely.
when I was saying earlier about like when you leave the unit, like it's gone.
Oh yeah. Oh
Everybody
yeah. For
moves
me,
on,
it
right?
was don't let the door hit
Yeah,
you on your
exactly.
way out.
And
Like it was not an easy
no,
transition.
no. And I know guys that this is the other trick too. Is I know a lot of people that they'd get out in Edmonton and they would just retire there, and so they'd still be surrounded by people. They still have the other vets that they've known that have lived there and so on and so on. But I know guys that went up to like Flin Flon out in
Yeah.
Manitoba. There's
Yeah.
no support. The nearest VA office is in Winnipeg, and like you're basically on the other side of the moon for the other
Yeah.
military guys in the area, right?
Yeah.
And so like when it comes to stigma, that can just eat away at you, and those things that were of such pride, which you should be proud of,
Yeah.
just slowly get turned on that, based on that stigma that just like eat away at you. So
Yeah.
what would you say
Yeah.
to somebody? How would you try and get them out of that
Oh.
funk? What kind of information would you give them?
Oh my gosh.
Yep, you're on the spot now.
Oh, I know. And it's something that I dealt with for a long time. And part of what like the issues and stigma that I dealt with is my trade was not transferable to anything civilian. Turns out civvies aren't that into boats, ropes, and guns. So I had a really hard time. The only thing I could think to do was join the Coast Guard. I got basically all but hung up on, when I was making inquiries. I looked into civilian search and rescue for a while. And my first instructor said, "Are you married? Do you have kids? Do you have a house?" And I was like, "Excuse me?" And he goes, "Well, if you don't have any of those things, you're a flight risk and you're no good for search and rescue." And I was just
Yep.
like, at 22 years old or 23 years old, I was like, okay. And I didn't know, and that was maybe part of my military experience. I didn't know well enough to be like, fuck you, and ask somebody else.
Yep.
I just should have just kept going. But I got this door slammed in my face. I was trying to figure out how I could use those skills, how I could bring them with me into the civilian world. And that disconnect, I think, was a major source of my transition issues. I remember trying to drive a boat one day. Somebody I knew quite well, an ex-boyfriend. We went out one day. I was like, "Look, I can drive this boat." And he's like, "Ah," and he made fun of me. I was like, I literally did this for like literally, this was my job. I was
Yep.
actually like tactical boat handling for my career. Like that's what I did.
Yep.
And he wouldn't even let me drive his dinky little boat. And it was so, I mean, he thought it was amusing at the time, but but that stuff like digs into you.
Mm-hmm.
Your experiences in the military get undermined, and then you get into the civilian world, and there's no authority, respect, timing, respect. Nobody cares that well. You can polish your shoes, shoot a gun, um, whatever. But
Yep.
so I don't have an answer for that. Um,
Well, I was
yeah.
gonna say the thing that caught in my brain there as you were talking was, um, you have a lot of transferable skills. And this is one thing that a lot of vets don't realize is that even like I know a lot of infantry guys who are like, I'm like, what am I going to put on my resume? I can shoot, I can do a lot of push-ups, and I can run. Right? What am I going to do?
Yeah.
But all three of those disciplines are extremely hard to come by in the civilian world. And if you break those skill sets down into their different parts, like, guns, okay, how many different guns can you strip and assemble right now, just off the top of your head?
Oh, me specifically?
Yeah.
Oh, I was really good at like 5 of them.
Okay, so
or 6.
the amount of recall and memory, just like storage and recall, the amount of muscle memory that you've developed, and the attention to detail to know all the different parts of the different weapons and how they go together, that is an extremely important skill set, and most people don't realize that. I always say, as a machine gunner, what does machine gunning have to do with the regular world? Well, you have excellent situational awareness. You have a really good ability to manage the difficult jobs that most people don't want to do. Like, there's leadership in there. Like, you can break them down into actual skill sets. Attention to detail is huge.
Right. And like that's why there's all sorts of job transition opportunities for veterans now, or for people who are releasing from the military. When I left, there was not like it was absolutely nothing. I just decided to start painting houses. Literally, like I ended up having my own painting company, which was fine. But I didn't know that there were these other transferable skills. Like once that door was closed to the unit to me, I was restarting a new career and I didn't know who else to talk to. And when I would say, like, these are my skills, and the civilian was like, well, I don't know. We don't shoot guns here. We're in the mountains. There's no boat. Like, what do you want? So it was, it took years and years and years for me to carve a niche. And that's what I've done. And I think that's another piece of advice that I would give people is you can actually carve your own way. You can get creative with that skill set. I was fortunate to be able to combine military experience with passion for the outdoors and adventure, and use that in education and help me to understand my own stigma and my own life trajectory. I've been lucky to be able to marry that stuff. And I feel like, those opportunities are out there. You don't just have to do one single job when you leave, or something that you posted the other day, about trying in order for, what was it, the success, oh my gosh, I can't, the first thing you have to do is try. So that's what I spent years and years doing, is just trying over and over and over, lots and lots and lots of failures. But I've gotten really comfortable with failure, actually. It helps you understand what you want.
Yeah, and that's that insight, right? Like, if you can look at a failure, this is one of the things that I learned from jiu-jitsu really fast, was if you lose, there's a reason that you lost. It's not that he's better than you, right? You either gave up something, you like gave too much space, you let him in a certain area, like something happened that you did that you could have prevented this thing from happening. And if you just get upset that you lost, you're not learning anything, right? Then next time you roll, you're going to lose again, and it's going to be the exact same thing. But if you actually take the time to go, where was it that I gave you that? Like, I gave you my arm somewhere. How did you get my arm? And then they'll be like, oh, well, when you transferred over, you lifted your elbow, and then I just latched onto it. And you're like, oh, okay. And then next time you can keep your elbow tight when you make your turn. It's just that little bit of insight to go, what happened there? Instead of going, I fucking lost, I failed, this isn't going to work for me. And I've had hundreds of ideas of stuff that I wanted to do once I got out of the military. I really wanted to do an equine therapy ranch. I still have the idea and the plan in my head, and I'm not giving that up. But right now, it's not the time for me to do that. Right now, it's time for me to do something else. So I started doing other stuff. I started working with the walk. I started working the podcast. I realized that the information that I had to share needed to be shared. So I started sharing it, right? And then I tried to get more people to say, hey, look, we can all just share information. Like, none of this is new. None of this is it's going to cost you anything. We all can look at it, and I realize also that most of the skill sets that I take now and I utilize every day, people were trying to teach it to me 10 years ago. People were trying to teach it to me 20 years ago, right?
That's a harsh realization, isn't it?
It is.
I have those moments, yeah, well, frequently.
But the thing I
Yeah.
always tell myself is that, like, I wasn't in the mindset to see it. And that's a big part. You have to be ready to actually see it.
Absolutely.
And, I think that's one of the things that Stigma does, is that it prevents you from taking the time to see it. It just stops you
Yeah.
cold, right? Like, this is,
Yeah.
oh, no, I'm not good enough. Or, oh, no, I'm just another broken veteran. Oh, I'm not even a veteran. I only served for 3 years, right? And I told you this, I've told many people this, is like, as somebody who decided that they were going to serve their country and put their body on the line, regardless, 5, 10, 15, 25, 35, 75 years, whatever it is, you're the one that when the country said, hey, I need help, you were like, all right, I'm in.
Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And whether you did anything, which is a horrible terminology and probably leads to the
Yeah.
stigma as well,
Of course.
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? You did the job. The job was for you to be a clerk in a small detachment out in bumfuck nowhere, Newfoundland. Okay, somebody need to fill that spot.
Yep.
You did it, right? You're still a veteran, and that's the one title no one can take from you, ever. On your tombstone, in however many years, you know what it's going to say? Canadian Armed Forces veteran.
Yeah.
on top of anything else, right? So
Yeah, it's true. It's a hard one still to reconcile. I still work on it. I now use the term frequently. For other reservists out there, like just through our conversation, I'm trying to think of the right words, but like as a reservist, you sign up to protect your country on your land. So you're doing your job every day. You are doing it every day. Just because you're doing it here and not out there, well, you didn't sign up to go out there. You signed up to be here, and that's what you're doing. You are cleaning up in Lytton, BC, or you are, sandbagging in Saskatchewan, or search and rescue off the west coast of Canada. That's what you signed up for, and that is your job, and that is serving your country. And that's, to me, it's taken me, despite having done all of that stuff, some of that stuff, it's hard to internalize that information. It's hard to, because you still live in this this structured world of hierarchy, like we were saying, that just gets ingrained from day one. So I think what you're saying about insights, if we want to tackle stigma, I think it's about asking these questions and being insightful with yourself and with other people. Why do you have this belief? What effect is it having on yourself, and what effect is it having on other people?
Yeah, and it does. It affects everyone around you. When you start to belittle yourself or start to belittle others, it affects that whole community, right? Like if I were to talk down to another unit, right? Which I only do that to every other unit that I know.
We all do. It's exactly the opposite of what I just said.
As a combat engineer, I'm just better than everybody. I mean, just
right.
no. So, like, there's a line between joking around and we're laughing about it, but that is part of the problem, is that we continue to joke around about it, and there is a line between trying to be hurtful and just having fun, right? So I can't say that, like, we can't talk negatively about each other. We can't try and build a little bit of a competitive nature, or try and create a little bit of a discourse to try and drive people forward.
Yeah.
But you have to be really careful of that line where it goes from, this is constructive and fun and kind of hilarious to hurtful and engaging that stigma even further into that next generation. Every time we train a new course, every time we put another group of kids through, that stigma is either going to keep going or it's going to get taught out. And Whitney said it on my last one. It was like, the privates are the future. And it was like, they absolutely are, because there's a private or a cadet somewhere that is going to be the next CDS. And if he or she maintains that stigma, then the stigma is going to be maintained. If not,
Absolutely.
then change happens, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we've been rolling for just over an hour now, and I'm wondering, do you have any final points? Anything that we haven't covered on stigma? Well, I
Oh
put you
my
on the
gosh.
spot immediately again.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I'm sure. I feel like tons of things popped up when we were talking. We
Oh,
only
yeah,
really
yeah,
just scratched the surface. Like,
yeah,
I don't know what the solution is. I think that, yeah, you know what, you're right in saying that it's the privates, it's the new ones that are coming up that are going to be able to change it. But I also think it's the people that are maintaining the status quo right now that really have a duty to help shift that.
yeah,
So you know. I think looking into your own thoughts and perceptions and how you're outwardly displaying them while you're in the military it has a really big impact. I'm not really sure that was particularly insightful, sorry.
Well, it's exactly what we need. I'm not here to find answers, right? The whole concept of this is to create the conversation so that the conversation is happening and that people can see
Mm-hmm.
that the conversation can happen,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the first step, right? Once we can start talking about it and be comfortable talking about it, then we can start making changes. Then we can start
Mm-hmm.
advancing the bar forward a little bit. And for so many years, we
Yeah.
haven't moved that bar at all, if backwards, if anywhere, especially
Mm.
uh, especially
Well,
after
I'm
Afghanistan.
yeah, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk with you about this stuff because even for me with my, you know, my military background, my education background, and looking at stigma, it's still difficult for me to talk about the time that I spent in the military because I'm talking to somebody who had such a different career than I did, somebody who went overseas, someone who did the work. You know, it's difficult. So to have this opportunity and being able to talk about it really openly and directly has been great. So thank you because that does me a lot of good.
My pleasure. I just enjoy chatting with people. Apparently, I'm a bit of a social butterfly. So, what can I say? All
No.
right, right. But I appreciate you being on here. I really want to thank you for being here because every every view on this is valid because every person is going to look at this issue differently and everybody is going to pull information differently. And I
Mhm.
mean, I don't know how many little tidbits of information that I've pulled from all the conversations I've had, because there's been a lot that I've
Yeah.
been able to learn through this, and my whole goal is just like, again, we're talking about it, right? So there's
Yeah.
somebody out there that's gonna go,
Yeah.
that's a good point, and either
Yeah.
add it in
Yeah.
or not, but like at least someone's thinking about it, and that's the
Mhm.
important part. Again, so I really appreciate it. I just this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for being on, and
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm hoping because there's a lot more on stigma that we can talk about, so I should be able to get you on
Yeah.
another time and we can dive in a little
I would
harder.
I would love to talk about it more. I could talk about stigma. I mean, it doesn't sound like it, but I could talk about stigma all day long. Certainly from a lived experience perspective as well. So I'd be more than happy to chat again.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay. I'll talk to you soon then.
Okay. Okay. Bye.
That concludes this episode of The Toolbox. I want to thank you for listening. I hope you were able to use some of the information that was offered. I want to thank all those putting it on the line for us every day: military, veterans, first responders, and public servants. Keep up the good work. I look forward to bringing you more tools for your toolbox. And until next time, stay open, stay humble, and stay focused. Chimo.